There's a moment, usually small, usually quiet, when you first feel it. A text left on read for 6 hours. A joke that cuts a little too close. A silence at dinner that feels heavier than it should. You tell yourself it's nothing. You tell yourself you're overreacting. And that sentence, "you're overreacting," might be the first sign that something in the relationship has already begun to bend you out of shape. Toxic relationships rarely announce themselves. They don't begin with cruelty. They begin with warmth. So much warmth that when the cold finally comes, you convince yourself you imagined it. By the time most people recognize what's happening to them, they've already forgotten what their own voice sounded like before it started shrinking. This is a story about that shrinking and about how people find their way back. Chapter 1. The Architecture of Love Bombing. Amara met Julian on a rainy Tuesday outside a bookstore in Lagos. He held the door. He remembered the title of the novel tucked under her arm. 3 days later, he sent her a playlist he said reminded him of her laugh. Within 3 weeks, he was calling her his person, his home, the only one who had ever truly seen him. It felt less like dating and more like being found. What Amara didn't know, what almost no one knows in the moment, is that this intensity had a name. Psychologists call it love bombing, an overwhelming, accelerated performance of affection designed, consciously or not, to fast-track intimacy before trust has actually been earned. It isn't inherently sinister. New love often feels enormous. But there's a difference between genuine early infatuation and a campaign of affection engineered to create dependency. The distinction lives in the pacing. Healthy affection grows alongside knowledge of the other person. Love bombing outpaces it. Julian didn't just admire Amara, he began to define her. He decided she was his soulmate before he'd met her friends. He declared they were destined before he understood her fears, her history, or how she took her coffee. He was building a story about her and inviting her to move into it. By month 2, he was mentioning marriage. By month 3, he was subtly discouraging her weekend trips with friends, not with demands, but with a wounded quiet that made her feel guilty for wanting anything outside of him. "I just miss you when you're gone," he'd say, and it sounded like love. It would take Amara over a year to understand that it was actually the opening move of control. This is the architecture of the trap. Intensity first, dependency second, control third. The victim rarely experiences it as 3 separate stages. It feels like one continuous, escalating romance. That's precisely what makes it so disorienting to leave. The person asking you to shrink is the same person who once made you feel infinite. Research on relationship dynamics consistently shows that rapid escalation, declarations of love within days, talk of a shared future within weeks, correlates with higher rates of controlling behavior later in the relationship. It's not proof of malice. Some people are simply passionate, and passion isn't pathology. But when overwhelming affection arrives without curiosity, when someone loves an idea of you faster than they've asked a single question about who you actually are, that's worth noticing. Amara didn't notice. Not then. She was too busy feeling chosen. Chapter 2. The Invisible Cage. Control rarely looks like control. It looks like concern. By her second year with Julian, Amara had stopped going to her sister's Thursday dinners. Not because he forbade it. He never forbade anything. He simply asked questions that made the outings feel not worth the trouble. Why does she need you there every week? Doesn't it bother you that she talks about you behind your back? There was no evidence for that last claim. There didn't need to be. The seed was enough. This is a pattern psychologists refer to as isolation by erosion. Not a single dramatic act of separation, but a slow narrowing of the world until the partner becomes the primary, then the only source of comfort, validation, and interpretation of reality. It's rarely executed as strategy. Often, the person doing it believes their own justifications completely. Julian wasn't lying when he said he worried about Amara's sister. He'd simply build a version of reality where his discomfort was always the most urgent thing in the room. Isolation works because it's incremental. If Julian had told Amara on day 1 that she'd need to cut contact with her family, she would have left immediately. Instead, each request was small enough to seem reasonable in isolation. Skip one dinner because he had a rough week. Skip another because they needed us time. Stop confiding in her sister about relationship problems because she doesn't understand us the way I do. Each concession felt minor. The sum of them was a cage with no visible bars. There's a psychological concept called the boiling frog effect, borrowed somewhat inaccurately from a biological standpoint, but powerfully as metaphor from the idea that gradual change goes unnoticed in a way sudden change never would. Toxic relationships thrive on gradualism. The partner doing the isolating rarely needs to lie. They only need to make the truth arrive slowly enough that it never triggers alarm. By the time Amara realized she hadn't seen her sister in 4 months, she didn't feel controlled. She felt confused about why she'd let herself drift. That confusion, that self-directed blame, is not an accident. It's the mechanism working exactly as it was never quite designed to, and yet somehow always does. Chapter 3: When Reality Becomes Negotiable. There's a particular kind of disorientation that has nothing to do with facts and everything to do with trust in your own mind. It has a name now, thanks to a 1944 film about a man who dims the gaslights in his house and then insists his wife is imagining the change. Gaslighting. For Amara, it started small. She'd mentioned something Julian said the week before, a promise, a plan, and he'd look at her with genuine, unshaken confusion. I never said that. You always do this. At first, she assumed her memory had failed her. Everyone misremembers things sometimes. But it kept happening, always in his favor, always tilting the narrative so that she was the one who was confused, sensitive, or making things up. What makes gaslighting so effective isn't that the gaslighter is a masterful liar. It's that the target genuinely doubts her own perception before she doubts his account. Human beings are wired to trust people we love. When someone we're close to insists on a version of events that contradicts our memory, most of us will question ourselves before we question them, especially if it happens occasionally rather than constantly, embedded among moments of real tenderness. This is where it becomes important to separate an occasional honest disagreement about memory, which happens in every relationship, from a pattern where one partner systematically positions the other as unreliable, oversensitive, or crazy. The first is human. The second is a slow campaign to make someone dependent on their partner's version of reality because they no longer trust their own. Amara began keeping a private note on her phone, not to confront Julian. She wasn't ready for that, but simply to check her own sanity. Small, mundane things. What he said on Tuesday, what he denied by Friday. It wasn't dramatic. It was survival. Something in her, some quiet and stubborn part that hadn't yet been talked out of existing, needed proof that she wasn't losing her mind. That instinct to document, to anchor herself in something outside his account of things, was the first sign that a part of her had begun, without permission, to prepare for a different future. Chapter 4: Why We Stay. This is the question people ask most, often without kindness. Why didn't you just leave? It's the wrong question, asked from outside a system that has its own internal logic. To understand why people stay in toxic relationships, we have to understand a concept researchers call trauma bonding, an intense attachment that forms specifically because of a cycle of reward and punishment, tenderness and cruelty, rather than in spite of it. Here's how it works. If a relationship were consistently bad, leaving would be simple. Consistency, even painful consistency, is at least predictable, and predictability is easier to walk away from. But toxic relationships are rarely consistent. They oscillate. Cruelty is followed by remorse. Coldness is followed by the old warmth, the old Julian who held doors and remembered book titles. This intermittent reinforcement, reward that arrives unpredictably rather than reliably, is, according to decades of behavioral psychology, one of the most powerful conditioners of attachment that exists. It's the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. The uncertainty itself becomes the hook. Amara didn't stay because she was weak. She stayed because every time she gathered the resolve to leave, Julian sensed it, and the old version of him would reappear. Flowers. Apologies that seemed to reckon honestly with his behavior. A weekend that felt, briefly, like the beginning again. Her nervous system, worn thin by months of vigilance, would flood with relief. Relief that intense doesn't feel like settling. It feels like love, possibly the most love she'd ever felt, precisely because it arrived after so much fear. This is the cruelest mechanism of toxic relationships. The abuse itself manufactures the intensity of the bond. The highs feel higher because the lows were so low. The nervous system, desperate for equilibrium, mistakes relief for devotion. There's also a quieter, less discussed reason people stay: identity. After enough time inside a relationship that requires constant self-monitoring, self-editing, and self-doubt, many people genuinely lose track of who they were before it began. Amara couldn't picture her life without Julian, not because she loved him uncomplicatedly, but because she could no longer remember with any clarity who Amara without Julian even was. Leaving didn't just mean losing a partner. It meant stepping into a void where her own identity used to be. Understanding this doesn't excuse the behavior of the person causing harm. It simply retires the question of why victims stay and replaces it with a better one. What does it take to leave, and how do we make that path easier for the people walking it? Chapter 5. The Mirror That Lies. By her third year with Julian, Amara had developed a habit of apologizing before she'd finished a sentence. She'd start explaining something she wanted: a job opportunity in another city, a friendship he'd been cool toward, and find herself softening it into near non-existence before he'd even responded. "I know it's probably not a big deal. I know you're probably right. I'm sorry. Forget I said anything." This is what chronic invalidation does to a person over time. It doesn't just change what someone believes about a single disagreement. It rewires the baseline assumption they carry into every interaction: that their perspective is likely to be wrong, that their needs are likely to be inconvenient, that their existence is something to apologize for by default. Psychologists sometimes describe this using the concept of learned helplessness, a term originally studied in contexts far removed from romantic relationships, but strikingly applicable here. When a person's genuine attempts to advocate for themselves are repeatedly met with denial, blame, or punishment, they eventually stop trying. Not because the attempts became less valid, but because the cost of trying began to outweigh any hope of being heard. The tragedy is that this withdrawal often gets misread by the person experiencing it, and sometimes by observers, as evidence that things weren't so bad after all. She stopped complaining. She seemed fine. But silence born of exhaustion is not the same as peace. It's often the deepest form of surrender a relationship can produce. The moment someone decides their own voice isn't worth the fight anymore. Amara noticed it first in small physical ways before she understood it psychologically. She'd catch herself rehearsing sentences in her head before saying them out loud to Julian, auditioning her own thoughts for his approval before she was even allowed to have them. She'd stopped ordering the entree she actually wanted at restaurants because once, months earlier, he'd made an offhand comment about her metabolism slowing down. She hadn't consciously decided to restrict herself. Her body had simply absorbed the lesson and started complying before her mind caught up. This is what toxic relationships do at their most insidious. They don't just change what you say. They change what you allow yourself to want. Chapter 6. The First Crack of Light. Change rarely arrives as a single dramatic scene. It usually arrives as a moment too small for anyone else to notice. For Amara, it was a Tuesday. Julian made an offhand comment about her sister, the same sister she now saw twice a year instead of every week, and something in Amara didn't flinch the way it used to. Instead, quietly, almost involuntarily, a thought arrived. That's not true, and I know it's not true. Not defiance exactly, just clarity. A single, unremarkable moment where her own perception outweighed his narrative for the first time in longer than she could remember. Psychologists who study exits from controlling relationships often describe this as the reclamation of the observing self, the part of a person that can notice a pattern from slightly outside of it, rather than being fully absorbed inside the pattern's logic. It doesn't arrive because of one big revelation. It accumulates through small, private moments of disagreement that the person doesn't voice out loud, but quietly, stubbornly, refuses to abandon internally. From there, the process is rarely fast, and it's almost never linear. Amara didn't leave the week of that Tuesday. She left 8 months later, and she went back once, briefly, before leaving again for good. This is common enough that researchers no longer treat it as a sign of weakness or confusion. It's simply part of how disentangling from a trauma bond tends to work. Multiple attempts are the norm, not the exception. The nervous system doesn't unlearn a years-long pattern of intermittent reward on the first try. What mattered wasn't the cleanness of Amara's exit. It was the direction of the pattern. Each time she left, she stayed away a little longer. Each time she went back, she noticed the old warmth a little faster for what it was, a return to the beginning of a cycle she now recognized, rather than a genuine transformation in the person offering it. The moment she finally stopped going back wasn't more emotional than the times before. If anything, it was quieter. She simply, finally, believed her own account of what had happened to her more than she believed his account of what it meant. Chapter 7. Rebuilding the Self. Recovery from a toxic relationship is rarely about the other person at all, once the leaving is done. It's about relearning a relationship with yourself that the other relationship slowly dismantled. For many people, this starts with something deceptively simple, making small decisions without consulting anyone. What to eat, what to watch, where to go on a Saturday. After years of auditioning her preferences for approval, Amara found that even minor autonomous choices felt disproportionately significant. Ordering the entree she actually wanted, the one she'd avoided for years, became a small act of reclamation. Therapists who work with survivors of controlling relationships often talk about rebuilding what's sometimes called interoceptive trust, the basic ability to notice an internal signal, discomfort, desire, hesitation, and trust that it means something without needing outside validation first. Toxic relationships erode this trust methodically, replacing a person's internal compass with a partner's approval as the primary source of direction. Recovery means slowly, patiently restoring that compass. It also means grieving, not just the relationship, but the version of the future that relationship once promised. Amara had built years of imagined life around Julian. The apartment they talked about, the trip to Zanzibar they planned twice and canceled twice, the version of herself she thought she'd become alongside him. Letting go of a person is hard. Letting go of an imagined future is often harder, and it's a grief that rarely gets the same social recognition as more visible losses. What helped Amara most, in the end, wasn't a single insight but a practice. The deliberate, repeated act of noticing her own reactions before editing them. When something upset her, she let herself feel upset for a full minute before deciding whether the feeling was reasonable. When something delighted her, she let the delight exist without immediately scanning for whom might disapprove. It sounds small. It rebuilt her from the inside out. Recovery isn't a single moment where a person becomes healed. It's a long accumulation of instances where they choose to trust themselves again, even briefly, even imperfectly, until that trust becomes less like a decision and more like a home. In summary, if you've recognized pieces of yourself in Amara's story, this closing is for you, specifically. You did not stay because you were foolish. You stayed because the human mind is built to bond, to hope, to find meaning in inconsistency when consistency isn't available. The mechanisms that kept you there, the intermittent reinforcement, the eroded self-trust, the slow narrowing of your world, are not signs of a character flaw. They're signs that you are, in fact, a person with a functioning nervous system that responded exactly as nervous systems tend to respond under those conditions. And if you haven't lived this story, but you know someone who has, resist the urge to ask why they stayed. Ask instead what they need to feel safe enough to trust their own perception again. That question does more good than any well-meaning lecture on red flags ever could. Toxic relationships thrive in silence and isolation, the same conditions they work so hard to create. the way out for anyone in one, and the way to help for anyone watching one from outside. Both run through the same thing: reconnection. To other people, to one's own memory, to the quiet, stubborn certainty that your account of your own life deserves to be believed, starting with you. Amara, 3 years out, still keeps that old note on her phone. Not because she needs it anymore, but as a reminder of a version of herself who, in the middle of losing everything else, refused to stop keeping the record straight. If this story reached you, that refusal is available to you too. This is the end of this session. Don't forget to subscribe so you can be notified each time we release a video.